it is patently absurd that a state cannot remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. I don't care what the time period is. So it's stretching the analysis of the statute pretty thin. I mean, they've lost all the way up. I think they filed an appeal to the Supreme Court yesterday, the state of Virginia did. But at the core of it, it's gross to be punishing a state for removing non-citizens from their voter rolls. We'll see what happens with the case there. I think you're going to, Governor Youngkin and his legal team have vowed to sort of appeal it all the way up to the top, and they filed that petition yesterday. And so I think voter roll maintenance is important. Reforms like kicking the federal government out. So we've done a lot of work on the Executive Order 14019 and exposing the partisan application of that. And a number of states have taken measures to remove the federal government from influencing their electoral system. Places like Idaho, Mississippi, Indiana. The Secretary of State has basically said, get the heck out of here.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Kyle Brosnan, welcome to the Signal Sitdown.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you are the chief counsel for the Oversight Project. We are days away from an election. I think you guys have been probably the most consistent source of viral content for election shenanigans leading up to this election. At least that's my algorithm. My algorithm keeps feeding your stuff to me, and I'm glad that they do. And I really wanted to bring you in to have this conversation because as we stare this election in the face, as November 5th comes at us at 100 miles an hour, we know that Tuesday night's probably not going to give us the answer. I don't know if it's because people in Maricopa County can't count, or if the suburbs of Detroit will, or the downtown Detroit will be completely boarded up. I don't know exactly why we won't have the answer, but it might be an election week or an election month or an election 3 months all the way until Inauguration Day. As we sit here, it seems like the former president, Donald Trump, is more popular than he's ever been. The polls in the swing states look good for him. The betting money, the good money, is picking Donald Trump to win the election two out of 3 times. He's up big in the swing states that he would need, in the betting markets at least, to carry the election. What do you think's behind this surge for President Donald Trump?
So I think Americans are realizing that they're not better off now than they were 4 years ago. And that's a simple and powerful message, that you have the heir apparent and Vice President Harris, who was coronated as the nominee without much of a process to pick her, and she hasn't distanced herself from the very unpopular policies of the Biden administration that her boss ran. And she's stuck in the middle there, right? Is she an integral player in the room, that she's been trying to push to the American public to show that, she's ready for this promotion to the highest office in the land? If that's the case, then she also owns all of the bad policies. Okay, she's the border czar that let in 10 million illegal aliens that that have flooded into this country, and we're seeing it in places like Springfield, Ohio, or Aurora, Colorado, in places in the interior. That every state is indeed a border state, and everywhere throughout the country is seeing the results of these disastrous border policies, and so, people were realizing they had more money in their pockets when President Trump was in office. They realized that the border was secure when President Trump was in office. They were realizing that, America's standing abroad was much better. You didn't have all of these wars, this chaos in Ukraine, this chaos in the Middle East when Donald Trump was in office. And then you see the closing message that you see on all these political ads that I'm sure everyone's inundated with when they watch football on Sunday. The simple message is, are you better than you were 4 years ago? And all of the polling and the data shows that Americans largely are not. And I think that is what we're seeing in the momentum that the President Trump has as we close out this election season.
Last election, 2020, it was nip and tuck. 40,000 votes, I think it was, across 3 states determined the outcome of the presidential election. President Trump was not in the place that he was in the polls 4 years ago that he is today. COVID had wrecked the economy, not by fault of the federal government, but because of the police powers that are delegated to the states because of the Constitution. It's really easy to wreck the economy when Gavin Newsom decides to shut down California for, 2.5 years or whatever it was. And despite that, Trump, in my opinion, did very, very well in the last election. Now, with 4 years of Biden with Kamala Harris as his number 2, right? Trump dipped in popularity at the beginning of the Biden administration, but has surged to popularity that I don't think he's seen before. And even with COVID and the difficulties and changing all the election rules in 2020, the corporate media and big tech worked overtime, it seemed, to censor the Trump administration, to censor not the Trump administration, but the Trump campaign, to censor content that would have been damaging to the Biden candidacy. It seems like your guys' social media strategy has been to try to circumvent or preempt any attempt by the corporate media or big tech to censor content before the election. Have you guys run into censorship problems? Are there things that you have your radar is looking out for on that front?
So I think we have drawn the attention of the Eye of Sauron of the New York Times and NPR right. and our friends at NBC News, Brittany Zadrozny and folks like that. So that tells us that we're over the target and that we are putting out content that is bucking the narrative that the corporate leftist media is pushing. I think that Elon Musk purchasing X and promoting free speech is one of the greatest accomplishments or feats that we've seen in this country because he is a true believer in free speech. And I don't have insight to the algorithm or doing that, but I've read the Twitter files that independent journalists Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi have put out. And under the old regime at Twitter, you saw concerted efforts to censor dissent and speech over core issues like, should we mandate the COVID vaccine? Is the COVID vaccine safe? And people that had legitimate opinions, legitimate scientific disagreements were censored, banned, and their content was pushed down. And example A is also the Hunter Biden laptop. You had these 51 intelligence agencies come out, 51 former intelligence officials come out, say it's the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, and you had the big tech companies, Facebook, old regime at Twitter, et cetera, prohibit people from sharing the New York Post story. And the New York Post story ended up to be 100% correct. The laptop is real. It was real, and it had an effect on the last election. There have been studies on, it could be a 5-point shift. I think President Trump was saying on Joe Rogan's podcast last week it was a 10-point shift. But when the margin comes down to 40,000 votes, every piece of information matters, and the fact that key discussions were censored before 2020. So now we're in 2024. We have a more free and open Twitter, and we've decided as a strategic matter to put the information out directly to the American people because trust in traditional media is at an all-time low.
What if Elon Musk wasn't in charge of Twitter, where do you think you guys would be with this effort?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we would still try to put the information out directly to the American people for them to view themselves, but I would expect that we would be censored.
But Jack Dorsey would be somewhere getting bit by mosquitoes doing ayahuasca and, some chief counsel of Twitter, not to bash your profession, but this is what we do on the show. We bash the lawyers.
Bring it on.
Yeah. Some lawyer who's obsessed with civil rights cases and civil rights law would say, no, actually, it's totally in accord with the Constitution and the spirit of the civil rights laws to censor all information that suggests any tomfoolery is going on in this election.
Yeah, I mean, you had the former general counsel of Twitter was the former general counsel of the FBI. So the FBI has been weaponized by and completely overtaken by radical leftists pushing an ideology, arresting their political opponents, and we've done a lot of work exposing how left-wing ideology has completely taken over the FBI and has really deteriorated its standing as a chief law enforcement agency. And so that person goes and is now the top legal voice at Twitter. You lead to censorship. And we definitely saw that in spades in 2020 now. And so with the free and open Twitter now we have, we're putting out videos on election integrity. We could get to those later, but they're generating tens of millions of views. Elon Musk himself is engaging with this material. And when the corporate media can't be trusted, the trust in it is at an all-time low, we think that putting that information out directly to the American people, whether it be videos, whether it be actual documents we get through litigation or FOIA requests, analysis of our investigations, we trust the American people to make their own judgments and come to the correct conclusion on things. And people may disagree with our analysis, and that's fine. But if we put all the source material out there, they could view it for themselves and make a determination on what they think the truth is.
Well, it's not a democracy if you don't have the free flow of information. And I'm not always the keenest on democracy. Neither were the founders. Democracy is mentioned, I believe, 11 times in the Federalist Papers, not once in a flattering way. Curtis Yarvin makes this point. We have this weird modern political lexicon where political is carries negative connotations and democratic carries positive connotations. It was exactly the opposite less than about 150, 200 years ago. But I can't stress what you just said enough. The chief counsel of the FBI went and became the chief counsel for Twitter, where he used, I assume, skills in censorship learned at the FBI to censor everyday Americans. Is that what it seems like? Is that how it is? I mean, explain this revolving door to me.
Yeah, so independent journalists Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi and others were given access to the Twitter files at the start of whenever Musk purchased it. This is a few years back now. And they published troves of documents about how officials within Twitter basically censored dissent on things like COVID and vaccine, COVID policy, vaccine safety and efficiency, the Hunter Biden laptop, other social issues that were important in 2020 and before. And this person's emails are all over it. I mean, the House Judiciary Committees hold multiple hearings on it. I personally think it was a missed opportunity and that they could have subpoenaed the documents themselves and done a more further investigation into social media, because I think it's one of the most disgusting instances of censorship that we've ever seen in America. I mean, I used to work for Senator Ron Johnson, and he has been a very vocal voice on matters like election integrity, safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccine, and he was banned from YouTube. A sitting U.S. senator, chairman of a committee, YouTube took down footage of a hearing he held in the United States Senate on the integrity of the 2020 election, citing misinformation. So Congress is supposed to be open and available to the public. We have C-SPAN that shows all these hearings, and you have the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee in the Senate holds a hearing on election integrity, and YouTube bans him. That is disgusting. That you may disagree with what the senator's saying, but it's his prerogative. The people of Wisconsin voted him in. He was selected to be the chairman of the committee by his peers. It's his prerogative. He's holding a congressional hearing. This is your government in action, and some overlord at YouTube is determining that you shouldn't be able to see that. That's patently absurd. And so I do think you've seen a shift with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter and people being more vocal on the dangers of censorship, and that free speech, you may disagree with me, but the fact that we need to be able to have this conversation has becoming a huge election issue. I think conservatives are it's a winning issue for conservatives to be pro-free speech, and the censorship that occurred in 2020. I don't think we've uncovered the half of it, but what we do know is deeply disturbing.
You called it the eye of Sauron, right? The eye of the corporate media, the eye of the what you might call the machine, the corporate machine. Tell us a little bit about being scrutinized like that on the eve of an election. Here you are. Just a lot of the videos are just your team talking to people about what they believe, what they think, how they might be voting, if they should be voting at all. And yet, these simple interviews, man on the street, it's a little undercover sometimes too, but they can't stand it. Why do you think they can't stand it? What's it like being under the eye of Sauron?
It's fun.
Yeah.
Again, it tells us that we're over the target.
Yeah.
And that, here's an example. We did an operation in Georgia where we went to an apartment complex and spoke to people at their homes and knocked them on the door and said, "Hey, are you registered to vote? And are you a citizen?" And a number of people said yes, that they were registered to vote and they were non-citizens. And so, in good faith, we went to the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, and made a referral to him and sat down with his investigators and said, "Look, these people, this is the address we went to. These people were admitted, on camera to being registered to vote as non-citizens, which is a crime. Can you look into it?" And even before we had the meeting with them, he sent a letter to the legislature in Georgia calling us misinformation. He made disparaging remarks to us in the New York Times. He partnered up with them in New York, and they partnered up with the New York Times to write a hit piece on us to say how bad these videos are and how wrong they are and yada, yada, yada.
Brad Raffensperger, self-proclaimed conservative Republican, who was a major figure in the 2020 election. This is the same Secretary of State of Georgia.
Correct. And now we have FOIA'd his office for communications with the New York Times for their role in the hit piece against us. And curiously, the records will not be available until around Christmas time. We put this FOIA in 2 months ago. It's a simple email poll. And so you see, I think there is sort of a monolithic, there is nothing wrong with the elections. And if you question it, you are a conspiracy theorist. It's a very zero-sum game with these people. And I think there is no room for nuance, no room for discussion in the election integrity matter to where the elections are either perfect or you're a conspiracy theorist. There's no middle ground. And we are trying to, go out there and expose real and legitimate problems with the way elections are run throughout the country so people who are in charge of them can make decisions to make them better. I don't think it's a partisan issue that we don't want non-citizens voting in U.S. elections. Okay, that is an attack on the sanctity of our electoral process. It's what makes us Americans, our ability to elect our leaders. And when you have people who are not citizens, who do not have that sovereign obligation to be an American citizen, that right, that important privilege, deciding that's just gross. It's wrong. And the fact that it's become a partisan issue is gross. And that we're being attacked for exposing these vulnerabilities by corporate media, the left, everyone under the sun is again disturbing because again this should not be a partisan issue.
What do you think happens if the left has its way? Do you think that there's going to be repercussions for people who try to expose the lie? And you don't even need to believe, as you just said, that I've got my tinfoil hat on and every vote cast for Kamala Harris must in some way be fraudulent. You don't have to think that.
We don't think that.
Smart people, yeah, smart people think there's some, at least. Right. The idea that nothing ever can be called into question, and the veracity in which they say it feels so Soviet. And meanwhile, all of their starlets, well, not starlets anymore. They're more like supernovas. Hillary Clinton, Stacey Abrams, Al Gore, John Kerry. I mean, these people spent years denying elections. All that is to say, what type of repercussions would there be if the left wins on this front?
So that remains to be seen. I think it could be dystopian and, predict that you might see a expansion of the weaponized law enforcement function. I mean, you've seen it now under the Biden-Harris administration. Things like pro-life activists having FBI SWAT teams show up at their door at 5 o'clock in the morning, where this gentleman's 5 young children has an FBI agent with a rifle pointed at them in their home to broader censorship through the various bureaucracy, state level people going crazy. You see these cases in New York City and in Georgia going after President Trump for ridiculous charges there. I think you can see an expansion of the weaponized state of government going after people. Wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of the conspiracy theory around voting integrity.
Please do.
Noted conservative President Jimmy Carter wrote a report in 2005, so almost 20 years ago at this point, where he said that the number one vulnerability to the sanctity of American elections is mail-in ballots and absentee ballots, to where you can't verify who a person is, they don't go up to vote, and it's susceptible to fraud. He said this 25 years ago. And what have we done with elections in America since then? 2020 using COVID as excuse is that we have just proliferated mail-in ballots, ballot harvesting, and the like. And so we're using data now to sort of track, addresses with voting addresses. I think you saw there was an issue coming up in Pennsylvania where dozens of voters are registered at one address, which ended up being like a convent, and the nuns there saying, hey, we don't know who these people are. And so I think when you have mass mail-in ballots, again, Jimmy Carter, it was a bipartisan commission with President Carter, said 20 years ago that this was a big vulnerability. And we have only expanded that vulnerability in elections in our country now.
Well, it's worked to the benefit of Jimmy Carter now, who's apparently voting for Kamala Harris, though he can't speak and is on hospice care. And I wish nothing but the best and nothing but health for President Jimmy Carter. But it just goes to show, clearly here's someone who's incapable of voting, essentially, and someone's voting for him. Now, does that make that vote illegal? Not necessarily, no. But it's just it's staring you right in the face. You see that Jimmy Carter is on death's door and is incapable of filling out a ballot for himself. So how is he legally voting? Yeah, sure, you can deputize and stuff like that, but millions of Americans, let's not say millions, but hundreds of thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Americans could potentially be in the same position, right? And elder abuse is a giant problem in this country. You probably know better than I do. And so we talk about dead people are voting, but it's also just hey, you live with grandma and grandma is a conservative, but she's on her deathbed. You can take that ballot and vote how you'd like to vote with it. And it feels like anyone who understands just how divided our politics is right now, anyone who understands how knee-jerk a lot of these reactions are from the American people, whether it's right or left, anyone who understands just those simple aspects of human nature know that there's got to be a little bit of election impropriety happening, right? It's nothing, no election is ever perfect. Is it fair enough for everyone to go along, get along, and accept the results? And frankly, sadly, your work has made that a lot harder because you see the tomfoolery in action. So you talked a little bit about this operation in Georgia. Tell us more about that operation in Georgia, and then we'll talk about some of the other exposés. I guess you've other pieces of information you've uncovered in the lead up to this election.
Yeah. So what we did in Georgia mirrors what we did in now 3 other states. So we've done operations in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Minnesota, and we are associated with a team of undercover journalists that go and just speak to people, in the community and ask them a couple of key questions. Are they registered to vote? And are they U.S. citizens? And in multiple apartment complexes in these 4 states, we had people admitting to us on camera that they were registered to vote and they were not U.S. citizens. And it follows a disturbing pattern. Again, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Whatever the saying is, it's the same thing we're getting in 4 different states here. We put out another video in Arizona, where in a supermarket there, a guy working the self-checkout counter came up, was talking with our undercover, and the undercover said he was a dreamer, not a citizen, and this person working the self-checkout counter said he was with an organization and offered to register our dreamer person and all of his friends to vote. He was saying, hey, just give me 15 minutes when I go on break, come up to my car, I'll register you out there. And so this is a pattern that we're seeing in multiple states throughout the country. It's not rocket science. We're just going out in the field and talking to people, and they're admitting to these being registered to vote as non-citizens on camera, and some of them are 10-15% of the people we talk to. It's a small sample size, but the positive hits we're getting are alarming. And if you extrapolate that out, you have a pretty sizable population here. So you have these videos in a very micro-targeted area of people, in their apartment complex admitting to being voting as non-citizens. Let's zoom out to the macro. The border is wide open. Some estimates 10 million illegal aliens have come into this country. Others have been legalized by decree with an abuse of the parole system. That's what we're seeing in Springfield, Ohio, with all the Haitians and some of the Venezuelans throughout the country as well. So you have 10 million people that have come in. These people are eligible to get driver's licenses in many states. And in those states, the DMV is the vector to register people to vote automatically. So when I moved into a new state, I was a new citizen, so I moved from state A to state B. When I went to the DMV to get my license for my new address, they asked me if I wanted to register to vote. And I said, of course, thank you. It was very convenient. I was registered to vote in my new home. I'm off to the races voting there now. Now, the DMVs say that they have checks on people who are non-citizens to get to vote, but when you have 10 million people coming in, people are going to slip through the cracks inevitably.
Well, and anyone who's ever been to a gosh darn DMV knows that this isn't the government agency that you want tasked with making sure that your elections are run efficiently. They can't give 16-year-olds driver's license efficiently. You go to a DMV. Most of the time, you can't even get in because it's so overwhelmed. And when you can get in, you sit there for 3 hours, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and then your number's called. I remember in the early days of Netflix, when Netflix started streaming, they had a jingle, let's go out to the DMV, let's go out, because it was such a miracle that you could watch TV on your phone while you waited at the dang DMV. That was one of Netflix's major pitches. Hey, you're bored, stuck in a line in public, watch your favorite TV show. Yep. This is not the government agency, no matter what state you live in, that you want running your elections. Right. And yet, with Motor Voter, we've forfeited so much of that to the DMV. And so, I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were saying that there are some checks. What are those checks? Are they actually used? It doesn't seem like anyone who's ever been to a DMV would have a lot of confidence in their ability to make sure that when they're issuing non-citizens driver's license, that they also make sure that those people aren't voting.
Right.
Or registering to vote.
We get assurances from every election official throughout the country to say, hey, once we get a voter registration material, we check it on the back end. We also had another instance where a source of ours, a Chinese or Taiwanese illegal alien out in California, received a invitation to register to vote in California. It was both in English and in Chinese. And there was nothing stopping this individual from checking a box, saying, yep, I'm a U.S. citizen, and sending it in. Maybe it will be caught on the back end. A state like Michigan, you could register to vote online. I went through the process, everything except for hitting send. All I had to do was check a box and say I was a U.S. citizen. They didn't ask me for my social security number. They didn't ask me for any other information on that. So there is no way. It's sort of we used to work on the Hill, and basically the way the federal government wastes millions of your tax dollars every year is that they pay it out. And then they try and chase the fraud after the fact. It's very similar to that, where it's like, okay, you could fill the form out and we'll hope we'll catch you on the back end here. And so
why is that the system that they've put in place?
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get the federal government to, in my oversight committee, to be more responsible on the front end for years, and unsuccessfully, unfortunately. But I think, and then you see the Democrats, predominantly Democrats in Congress here, the Speaker Johnson tried to get the SAVE Act, which would require affirmative proof of citizenship to register to vote. And he tried to tie it to the spending bill that passed before they left for recess here, and it was opposed. The Democrats, opposed it in the House, and Schumer said it was a non-starter. President Biden said he wouldn't sign it. And so shoring up the sanctity of our elections by requiring proof of citizenship has become a partisan issue. Things like voter ID. I went to go vote in my home state. They don't, this week early, they didn't have any ID requirement. I walked up and said, what are the first 4 letters of your last name, first 4 letters of your first name, your address, and your date and month of birth? And they printed out a paper and gave it to me. Said, is that all right? Yep, that's me. And I went off and voted. So you have things like opposition to voter ID, opposition to proving citizenship that are become hotbed partisan issues when they shouldn't be. You have pools of voters in Arizona. Arizona has a law to where you have to require proof of citizenship to vote in state elections. There is a pool of voters that are basically federal only that have not given that proof of citizenship. Can't vote in state elections, they can vote in federal ones. And
that doesn't make any sense, though, because the Democrats' whole argument during this SAVE Act process was, at first, illegal and non-citizens voting in federal elections is already illegal, and therefore we don't need to write another law, right? The law would be redundant. We don't need to do this. Was there any credence to that argument whatsoever? And maybe it might have been illegal, sure, for non-citizens to vote in federal elections, but clearly if there's a giant pool of federal election-only Arizona voters who refuse to provide their evidence of citizenship, maybe the federal government should take interest in that because the laws are not being executed or they're not strong enough to make sure that our elections are secure.
Right. I mean, they're right that it is illegal, but you're forced to basically play whack-a-mole and indict individual voters, or maybe if there's some sort of conspiracy going on to register non-citizens and vote non-citizens en masse. But, indicting, 3 people here, 6 people here, 20 people here, it's not efficient. And if you put a check on the front end, you would remove the need to play that game of whack-a-mole and indict people as you see a problem, as you see a violation. It would give people more confidence in the electoral system. I think confidence in the sanctity of elections is low at this point in the country. And again, would make it so you don't have to waste prosecutorial resources in going after people. Whereas if you just have the checks on the front end and build in systems and redundancies, sort of a belt and suspenders approach, it would give people confidence that non-citizens are indeed not voting in our elections. Yeah. But they've opposed it, so here we are.
Well, and then the argument quickly shifted from, as it gained momentum on the Republican side, the more conservative side of the legislature, House members were saying this is a redundant law. And the Democratic House members, there were 2, I believe, who voted in favor of the Spending Bill plus SAVE Act. 2 vulnerable House Democratic seats. Jared Golden, I think, was one of them, for example. And the House Democrat argument was this is a redundancy in the law. So we're not going to come out and say in an election year where immigration is the top issue that we are for non-citizens voting. When all of a sudden it became a question of, okay, if this passes and goes to the Senate, what's Chuck Schumer going to do with it? Chuck Schumer and a bunch of the safer House Democrats and a bunch of other Democratic senators said, well, this is a poison pill, right? I.e., this is a non-starter for us. Actually, non-citizens being implicitly, right, non-citizens being able to vote in our federal elections is so essential to us that we're willing to potentially shut down the government over it. What is the motivating factor there? What is the left's goal for the United States by letting these non-citizens vote in our elections, or at least implicitly turning the other cheek, turning a blind eye to the whole issue?
I think it's a long game when you combine it with the open borders policy. Is that they see if these people get amnesty or eventual citizens, they see it eventually them becoming Democratic voters. That's admittedly cynical, but I do think that is a real possibility. I think one of the things they also say is that, look, if you do these voter maintenance or you put these checks on people, requiring a thing like a proof of citizenship to vote, you can potentially prohibit a citizen who is eligible to vote from voting. But I think if you've seen sort of and that's their main opposition to voter ID. They claim it's racist. They claim, it's going to present a massive barrier to people voting. I think that's all nonsense. I mean, I think it's incredibly easy to register to vote in the United States. It's incredibly easy to vote in the United States. I mean, you look at all of the chaos and the scandal that came out of Georgia updating their election laws. I forget which year, back in 2021 or so. President Biden called it Jim Crow 2.0. Major League Baseball pulled the All-Star game over it. And look at the early vote totals in Georgia. They're through the roof. More people are voting in Georgia now than ever. I mean, it's they've cried wolf over things like election integrity, using dog whistles like it's a racist thing to require someone to vote for ID. You need to present ID to buy a beer in America. You need to present ID everywhere in America. You need to sign for a package when you get it delivered to your house. Proving who you are, there's very few Americans who don't have an ID and don't have access to it. It's a completely straw man argument, and they're using scare tactics by using things like racist to rile up their base, and bring opposition to it. But if you look at the data, again, all of the outrage that came from the Georgia law turned out to be completely wrong. And so I think it's to rile up their base, and it's the old tired trope that conservatives and Republicans are just racist, that they're trying to keep you down and they want to come after you, which isn't true at all. People should vote in America. That's the functioning part of our republic. It's our sovereign obligation as citizens to choose our elected officials that make important policy for this country. And but I want only citizens to do it, and that should be a nonpartisan issue. And the fake scandal just doesn't tread water with me.
So millions of illegals, some of them non-citizens at least, have told you guys flat out that they're registered to vote in the 2024 election. What kind of impact could that have on the 2024 election? And you hear this argument sometimes from friends in the conservative movement who say, listen, I understand the concern over illegal immigrants voting in our elections, given 10 million people have come across the southern border during this administration, but we're not seeing the voter registrations spikes that would correlate or correspond with this massive influx of illegal migrants, right? So, why aren't we seeing voter registration in illegal immigrant communities in Arizona, for example? Why aren't we seeing that precinct voter registration, just skyrocket? I think that there's on a data level, there's credence to that argument. But yet again, I see all of this personal testimony from people not knowing that they're on camera talking to a journalist saying, yeah, I'm a non-citizen, I'm registered to vote. And maybe Donald Trump was better for the economy, but I do know that under Biden, I wasn't deported. And under Harris, as his number 2, I won't be deported either. So if I'm in the ballot box, I kind of have to pull the lever for Harris because I don't want to go back to my, home country that's run by gangs rather than my government.
Yeah, so I think you're not seeing the spikes.
A lot there, but
you're not seeing the spikes on the data level. But when the margins were so close, what was Arizona decided by? 11,000 votes last time. I mean, it was 30,000, 40,000 votes across the swing states in 2020. When the margins are this razor thin, that matters. That could very well swing an election in some states. I mean, we're going to get into it with the 14019 in a little bit, but I think there is data in Arizona that the federal government is juicing turnout amongst left-wing voters to potentially that could make up the margin of victory in a state like Arizona. But 10 million have come over this administration. I don't think a fresh illegal alien is going to run to the voter try and register to vote. That's potential, and they might be put up there. But there have also been people that are living in this country for years as non-citizens. I mean, illegal immigration isn't a new problem. We just have 10 million more of them over the last 4 years than we did previously. But people that have been in this country for a long time, they work jobs like construction or food services or something like that. A lot of the people that we caught in the video told us they were registered at work. And so you have, non-government organizations that do things like mass voter registration in particular communities. You have ballot harvesting and stuff like that coming around the job sites, potentially registering people to vote there. That's what you get. And so, but yeah, almost everyone told us they were registered at work, which is interesting and what we found there, because folks in this community, they may work cash jobs, they may work day laborers as sort of construction workers or something like that, and that's tough to track. Not all of them are W-2 employees, right? Mm-hmm. So, that is true. You're not going to see 10 million new illegal alien voters on the rolls, but when the margins are really thin, and you're hearing the same story in 4 states to where somebody came to their work site and registered to vote, presumably from an NGO, you're seeing a trend there, mm-hmm. and that matters.
So it seems like the retort to those who say we're not seeing, my Excel spreadsheet does not show the spikes that correlate to a massive influx of illegal immigrant voters. The response is, yeah, because our current electoral system, but even before this kind of election model, our current electoral system that's based on turnout and mail-in and absentee voting is not built. The system is not built to track, vet, and ensure the security of our elections from illegal migrants.
That's true, and you also have states that are not good at updating their voter rolls. The RNC, for example, filed a lawsuit in Michigan earlier this year where they alleged that 53 counties in Michigan have more active voters on the rolls than U.S. citizens 18 and above in those counties. So it was a statistical impossibility for everyone, and other states have close to 90 or 100% voter registration. So if they're litigating this case, left-wing lawfare groups have intervened. Jocelyn Benson, the state of Michigan Secretary of State, is fighting it. But if you look at what the core of that lawsuit is that it is a statistical impossibility for the voter rolls in at least 53 counties in Michigan to be accurate. So they have to bring a lawsuit to try and get Michigan to get these people off the rolls. Mm-hmm. Now, there may be a combination of people that are dead, people that have moved, maybe non-citizens, who knows. We don't know why they're inaccurate. But just the numbers game, you have 109% of the 18 U.S. citizen population registered to vote there.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
And you'd like to see the electoral system broadly return to what I consider, a persuasion model, where it's not just who has a bigger, better, more efficient machine. It's who actually can court the American people, whose vision does the American people actually believe in. In order to get back there, obviously illegal immigration has a lot to play into that. What are some of the reforms that need to be put into place if conservatives take power in order to ensure a return to that sane election system and in order to secure it from non-citizens? I know we talked about the SAVE Act a little bit, which would do a little bit more work on the front end. But the problem is you have in the Constitution, we give a lot of power and prerogative to the states to run elections how they would like to run them, yet also creating some limited carve-outs for the federal government to impose certain rules. I'm being vague here because the language of the Constitution, as you know as a lawyer, is very vague.
Right.
So what are some of the reforms that need to occur that conservatives need to implement in order to secure the election system?
Yeah, so I think cleaning up their voter rolls is one instance. Mm-hmm. I mean, you saw Virginia try to do it now, where they removed I forget the number, but it was thousands of voters. Texas recently removed a million voters from their rolls, and in the case of Virginia and Texas, Virginia found 6,300 non-citizens on their voter rolls. Texas found 6,500 non-citizens on their voter rolls, and the Biden Justice Department has sued Virginia for doing that, to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. So I think...
No, sorry to interrupt you real quick. Is that something that would fit into the prerogative of the federal government under the Constitution? Like, can they actually sue, or is it like more of the meta-narrative?
So the Justice Department is arguing that the NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act, has a 90-day cooling off period to where you can't really touch your voter rolls 90 days before a federal election. And Virginia cleaned up their voter rolls, removed the non-citizens within that 90-day window. And so the Justice Department is alleging that Virginia violated that act. But if you sort of peel even one layer off the onion, it is patently absurd that a state cannot remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. I don't care what the time period is. So it's stretching the analysis of the statute pretty thin. I mean, they've lost all the way up. I think they filed an appeal to the Supreme Court yesterday, the state of Virginia did. But at the core of it, it's gross to be punishing a state for removing non-citizens from their voter rolls. And so we'll see what happens with the case there. I think you're going to, Governor Youngkin and his legal team have vowed to sort of appeal it all the way up to the top, and they filed that petition yesterday. And so I think voter roll maintenance is important. Reforms like kicking the federal government out. So we've done a lot of work on the Executive Order 14019 and exposing the partisan application of that. And a number of states have taken measures to remove the federal government from influencing their electoral system. Places like Idaho, Mississippi, Indiana. The Secretary of State has basically said, get the heck out of here. And so that changed it to more of a persuasion model, because you could let the campaigns run their messaging, try and turn out voters instead of having the federal government put their thumb on the scale there. I think things like policy changes to ensure things like voter ID, encourage in-person voting, things that President Jimmy Carter said 25 years ago were good, or 20 years ago, were good policies to assure the sanctity of elections. I think states do have a lot of power in how they run their elections, and you need leaders to be courageous to identify, look, there are vulnerabilities and confidence is low, and it's the interest of our constituents here that we want people to trust the outcome of the election, whether their side wins or loses, and you can make changes at a policy level or a procedural level to ensure that confidence is there.
I'm proud to say that I'm the first person in my family ever to get involved in politics, because I guess I'm the stupidest person in my family because I'm doing so.
I'm the same.
Yeah, but my family mostly comes from a small business background. And one of the complaints that my family had as small business owners is the law generally, right? Whether that's an administrative law or federal law, or, I'm from California state law, county law, all these different layers of law on top of one another, makes it nearly impossible for you to actually be compliant with the law, because every jurisdiction, and sometimes two laws in the same jurisdiction, contradict themselves, right? That's how thick our law code is right now. When I look at the Virginia example, okay, yeah, there's a 90-day cooling off period. Well, if they don't act, then they're essentially in violation of other federal laws that say non-citizens can't be on your voter rolls and cannot be voting in federal elections. Now, is that some of those laws targeted towards the individual non-citizen voting? Absolutely. But with that, there is an element of using state power to ensure that does not happen. Because when we're talking about the right to vote, when we're talking about the franchise, any non-citizen voting in an election inherently dilutes the power of the citizen's vote. So the state has a major role to play here. Is that the argument that Virginia's going for in this case? It just seems like election laws on the federal level need to be reduced and simplified, right? The federal government needs to, just like in trade policy, set the rules of the road, and then take a step back and let the states handle it.
Yeah, so I think I haven't read the filings that closely, but I understand that is sort of what they're arguing. It goes, look, we found vulnerabilities in our system here, and we need to fix them. It's better to do this on the front end. My understanding is that a number of the non-citizens self-reported and say, hey, I got a ballot in the mail. I'm not allowed to vote. What's going on here? I don't want to go to jail, right? I don't want to be accused of
am I being tricked?
Yeah. Right, am I being tricked? And so taking steps, and so they took steps in reaction to a lot of the incoming they were getting from people living in Virginia, but also, again, taking steps to, push the one person, one vote rule that the way elections are run in this country, and it's just really disturbing to see how aggressive the current administration is in punishing a state for removing non-citizens from their voter rolls. It doesn't make sense. They're doing the same thing in Alabama. You're suing them as well for this 90-day cooling off period. It's they have an uphill climb there at the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens. But they tried to take a measure to fix a problem they identified, and they're being punished for it now. And I think at a core level, you could parse the legalese here and there. Lawyers ruin everything. I fully admit that. But at a core level, it's a matter of right and wrong. And Virginia tried to fix a problem, and they're being punished for it now.
Speaking of federal involvement in our elections, back in 2020, there was Zuckerbucks, right? Big tech was registering people to vote, putting their thumb on the scale by investing tons of money. Obviously, this was Mark Zuckerberg's wife's nonprofit, I believe it was, or the couple's nonprofit. Now you've coined a term called Biden bucks, and this was the executive order you mentioned previously, Executive Order 14019. What is a Biden buck? What is it doing?
So a Biden bucks comes from, we're calling it Kamala campaign cash now too. All
the branding needs to be changed after the.
It's an executive order signed in March of 2021 that, on its face, encourages people to use to vote. They use the federal government to encourage people to register to vote, exercise their rights, gives people things like leave to go serve as poll watchers, go vote, stuff like that. A couple sections of the executive order that are troublesome is that it authorizes, there's two main issues. First is it tells all of the federal government agencies to submit strategic plans to the White House for how they're planning to implement the executive order, how they're going to use their resources to encourage people to register to vote, send them mail-in ballots, etc. And the second issue is that they're allowed to enter into contracts with approved state governments and non-government organizations to facilitate voter turnout, registration, ballots, stuff like that. So we have submitted about 20,000 FOIAs across the federal government on this executive order. And we found some pretty alarming things with how it's being implemented. So we got records from a listening session the Justice Department held in 2021, where they invited a bunch of these approved NGOs to come and talk about what they want to do. The White House was there as well. And as you would expect, every NGO that was there was a left-wing NGO. And they pushed pretty radical things. They pushed non-citizen voting, saying that people are, we need to trust people to be honest with us when they register to vote if they're citizens or not, when they just immigrated to the country illegally, this year or last year or whatever. Pushing things like felon voting, pushing things like people that receive government benefits when they receive their government benefit, basically at the point of sale, automatically being registered to vote. And so when you receive a government benefit, the federal agency will have your address. You're more likely probably going to lean for a vote for the party that likes bigger government. They'll have your address. They can mail you a ballot, and you intuitively know that your voter registration is tied to the receipt of your government benefits. So that's through things like federal housing subsidies, Head Start, a low-income education program. And so, we did this FOIA blitz, and the stuff we're getting back are pretty alarming. So the Small Business Administration, for example, runs a number of in-state events, outreach events to help small businesses. They signed a contract with Michigan. Michigan has signed an executive order at the governor's level to mark the Small Business Administration as an MVRA designated entity, to where the SBA has a hyperlink to where a person working with the SBA can click that link and be registered to vote. The Small Business Committee in the House has been conducting an investigation, and they found that the locations in Michigan where they're operating are all in Democrat-leaning voting districts, Metro Detroit, etc. Nothing in the Upper Peninsula or rural Michigan. So you don't see a gun shop owner up in the UP, being engaged with this because they're likely to vote one way. The VA, for example, the Veterans Administration also has a contract with the state of Michigan that we've uncovered. They are registering veterans to vote using a QR code, which again is you could just you scan your phone on the QR code, it'll take you to the voter registration site, and you just kind of attest with the honor system and go from there. Now, they're veterans. Most likely of them are going to be citizens because they're getting VA benefits. But the locations are important. They picked 2 VA hospitals in Detroit and 1 VA hospital in Saginaw, which is about a 50-50 split in the last couple of election cycles. So all of the evidence we're seeing for things like Michigan, that they're targeting particular geographic areas within the state to juice turnout for the Biden administration. We've seen things like Arizona, the Interior Department, which deals a lot with Native communities. The Secretary of Interior wanted to give a speech to particular Native communities, encouraging them to vote. Ethics attorneys within the department said, hey, you are not allowed to target particular demographics or groups of people for get out the vote message and not others because you could violate federal law called the Hatch Act. They also want to send home voter registration materials with children that attend Native schools. So there was a lot of questions. We got a lot of emails among the attorneys in the Interior Department to say, did Congress approve this? Did Congress pay for this? Is this legal? So it was an open question. So they were debating it. We got the addresses of the schools that they wanted to send them home to. So it's a lot of Native-run schools, particularly in the Southwest. And we mapped out the locations of the schools in Arizona and New Mexico. And we put this all out on Twitter. You could search it up at Oversight PR. But we found that the schools in Arizona were located in about 32 voting districts. I think the numbers were 29 of them were Democrat-leaning districts. And some of them, the breakdown was like 90-10 Democrat vote. So juicing turnout in Native communities that are heavily, heavily voting one way.
So this is using the full force of the federal government to ensure that there's no way to turn back to that persuasion model that we talked about, and to ensure that simply the Democratic administrative state machine determines the outcome of our election. I mean, there's something such so beautiful, so perfect, so apropos of having Kamala Harris be the nominee without one single vote, and this all happening in the background with and without you guys, no one would know that it's going on.
And in Arizona, that can make the difference here. I think we ran the numbers, and these may not be exact, but there are about 7,500 students attending Native schools in Arizona. The margin of victory was 11,000 votes. You figure they they send 2 voter registration materials home. If you have a 2-parent household, that's 15,000 more people voting there, and they're all targeted one way. That's your outcome right there potentially.
Yeah.
So on the strategic plans, we have FOIA'd all the strategic plans. They have claimed, and our friends at America First Legal have sued to get the strategic plans for all the cabinet agencies. The Justice Department has argued that these are presidential communications privileged documents, and that they are not allowed to see the light of day because they are using to inform the president. Each agency had to submit them to Susan Rice when she was at the White House, and they are informing the president about a potential decision he can make for encouraging Americans to vote. So if you think about that, we have an executive order signed by the President of the United States encouraging people to vote and encouraging the use of the federal government to people to vote. If you target it neutrally, probably not the worst thing in the world. We want civic engagement in the country, fine. But those plans for how they're going to do that should not see the light of day, according to the Justice Department. And a judge agreed with them and said that they are not allowed to see the light of day. And so, and the AFL has appealed up to the D.C. Circuit. I went to the oral argument a few months ago. It didn't go well. They're probably going to lose there as well. And so we did get some strategic plans from smaller agencies in error. And it's not a plan to inform the president of how they're, to inform President Biden and how to make decisions there. These agencies are actually going out in the field and doing it, as evidenced by the SBA, as evidenced by the Interior Department, as evidenced by the VA. And so they're actually implementing this executive order and putting their thumb on the scale for the federal government to support one candidate over another and juice turnout again. It's no longer the persuasion model, as you said. It's the turnout game.
And it's one of the biggest hurdles Republicans and conservatives have in this turnout model is the geographic problem. And the maps that you've sent me, that you've posted on Twitter, make it so clear exactly what the goal is here, right? Like, it is to make any Republican or conservative victory too resource intensive to attain. So if you think about the persuasion versus the turnout model determines that you send a few people to apartment complexes in Georgia, or you get VA hospitals in the Detroit area to register a bunch of people to vote. That's a really, really easy thing to do. On the other side of the ledger, for conservatives, for Republicans, they have to, in order to canvass the same number of people in that Georgia apartment building, they have to get twice, 3, 4 times as many volunteers, vehicles. They have to not get shot when they go on the rural Georgian's property and say, "What the hell are you doing? Hi, sir, have you been registered to?" You have to be wary of no trespassing signs, right? Like that geographical problem, the fact that you have to cover tens of square miles to canvass potentially the same number of voters as one apartment building in downtown Georgia or in downtown Atlanta. That's a massive problem for conservatives moving forward. And so if the federal government can put its thumb on the scale, that basically ensures an administrative state victory every single time. So the fact that these can't see the light of day, and that the fact that these government agencies are not only advising the president but are doing it, should invigorate, I think, any American who wants to make sure that elections are determined by them and not by people who supposedly are their moral betters in the government.
Yeah, I mean, our work has spawned 3 congressional House committee investigations. House Administration Committee, VA Committee, and Small Business Committee have sent subpoenas, and the Biden administration is obstructing those investigations. I mean, the House Administration Committee wants to depose people. It's unclear if they're coming in now, but if it's supposed to be a better for the republic, sort of executive order to encourage civic engagement, why are they putting up all these roadblocks? Senator in the Senate tried to pass a bill by unanimous consent to publish these strategic plans, and was blocked by Senator Padilla, the former Secretary of State of California. Mm-hmm. And so they're just putting up roadblock after roadblock after roadblock in any transparency in how this is being operated. And it's just by a sheer volume game, in that we've overloaded the system in terms of FOIA requests, that we did get information. And what we've uncovered is pretty alarming in terms of the scope. I don't know how many of your listeners have heard of the Small Business Administration. It's a pretty nondescript federal agency, but they're putting their thumb on the scale clearly in one way over another. And so, we'll see what happens. Your story about the turnout model is completely right. I remember when I was a younger person, I went to go door knock on a campaign, and this is in 2014. So we got a little app on our phone that says where the GOP voters are likely to be, and target out, get them to vote. And I was in a van with a couple of guys, and we were given sort of a rural county, and we would drive miles, in between houses. Get attacked by some giant dog that were getting out of the car, but it was potentially a tight race, and so it was every vote counts, and you had to go touch those voters. It's way easier when everyone lives in a very dense apartment complex, and you could just go walk door to door and harvest all those votes. It's a resource imbalance and a time imbalance for sure.
Yeah, looking forward to Tuesday, November 5th, and the potential fallout. You guys have started to think about how this election could be challenged from both the right or the left. In closing, what are some red flags to look out for on election night, and where could the election go from Tuesday on in terms of challenges to the validity of the election?
Yeah, so we actually mapped out for this contingency and called Transition Integrity Project 2024, where it was a bipartisan 2 separate war games that went on. We had former Senator Bob Torricelli, a Democrat from New Jersey, play the role of President Biden. And the report's online. I encourage you to read it. It's pretty interesting. We had about 60 players take place in it, and it was things like President Biden had not dropped out yet, so we did. It was published this summer prior to his leaving the race, and so we had war planned a Trump-Biden matchup, and you saw things like the potential of President Trump going to jail, which is a real potential here. So there could be he is due to be sentenced in his New York case in mid-November. So you could have a very real situation where he has an activist judge against him, whose conflicts are well documented. Real potential that he could be sentenced to prison time after he's the president-elect of the United States. And so with this judge and the corrupt New York judicial system going there, you never know what's going to happen. Things that we're looking at in terms, so we game plan this out. It's really interesting. Encourage your listeners to go read the report there. It's geopolitical or things like the FBI censoring folks again. There were a lot of interesting contingencies there in terms of how the war games played out. In real life, I think we're going to be looking at data. We've got folks that can crunch numbers. I think seeing the 3 a.m. vote drop where it's 90% one way in the sort of hockey stick graph, people are going to, be very concerned if that happens again. And that, that wasn't transparent in 2020. I think people are on the lookout for that again. I do think that the RNC is more prepared for sort of the lawfare angle than they have been in previous cycles. I think the Democrats basically have a 30-year head start on all the lawfare. So I know the RNC has put resources into being ready to be on the ground and win some of the legal battles. I mean, they've already started. There's dozens of cases filed on both sides of the ledger that judges are deciding, every day now. And so I expect the lawfare to ratchet up depending on the outcome as well. And then, I think the fact that the COVID has changed the game to where we no longer have an election day and election season, people have grown up in America expecting to know who the president is on election night, and that's not the case anymore. And so people are going to have to be patient, I guess. It's not great. I still don't understand how you can't count votes in. How does Florida count all their votes in 3 hours after the polls are closed? And you have the Secretaries of State of Pennsylvania and Arizona coming out saying 10 days. That doesn't breed confidence. And so expect lawfare to go wild and people to crunch the numbers and the data to really and use technology even that's advanced AI and stuff like that in the last 4 years to really potentially seek out abnormalities in real time as they come out.
Scary times. Thanks for taking a few minutes out of your day before this consequential election. Kyle Brosnan, thanks for coming on the Signal Sitdown.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of the Signal Sitdown. I have some bad news. Next week, there will not be an episode. Again, there will not be an episode on election week. Why? Well, because we need to make sure that we know the results of the election before we release something. We are not anticipating to know, at least I'm not anticipating to know, the results of the election on Tuesday night, and it'll probably take Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way possibly into the weekend for us to get this whole thing sorted. And who knows what kind of tomfoolery or lawfare is going to happen in the months that follow the 2024 presidential election. But what I do know is that we will be back the next week to talk about potentially a Trump transition or a postmortem of what went wrong during the 2024 election campaign cycle for conservatives. No matter how it goes, and I seriously have no idea how this thing is going to go, we'll see you then on the Signal Sitdown.